Here we are with another episode of Coffee with the Founder. I got my coffee cup here, got a little drink in there, and we have a special guest, another awesome guest, friend, colleague, a true sister, Suzie Hodges here with us. Suzie, listen, we're doing coffee talks just as a way to introduce people in the WPC network, WPC family, to each other, to know a little bit more about what we do, not just at the conference, but long after we leave the conference. So let's get started just by asking you, who are you? What do you do?
Okay, thanks for having me. My name is Suzie Hodges. I do all kinds of things, but mostly I teach second grade in Lake Washington School District. In the district, I am the facilitator for my equity team and serve on other committees in the district. And I also co-founded a group called CRREW, Collective for the Revolution of Race, Equity, and Whiteness. And we were doing some like professional development for in-service teachers around racial identity development. And yeah, I think that's all I do right now.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you a little bit more about CRREW, kind of how it got started, why it got started, what y'all are trying to do a little bit more in detail. But first, elementary, second grade, a lot of times people are wondering, is it too early to introduce kids to diversity conversations? I mean, what's your philosophy if you're talking to parents and they're saying, or they're wondering, hey, should I talk to my kids about this? What's your philosophy about talking to grade school age, preschool, K-5 students around issues of diversity and inclusion?
My philosophy is talk about it all of the time. My teaching pedagogy is based on liberation and to liberate us all from white supremacy and white supremacy cultural norms. And if you don't talk about it, we're not going to be liberated. And that kids watch everything we do all of the time. So they might not be talking about anything, but they're learning and understanding how people interact in the dynamics of friendship groups, families, how their parents talk to other people in the neighborhood or wherever they're going. So I always say, talk about it. If a parent asks me, should I talk about this? My answer is probably, well, we've already talked about it. So here's what we talked about. And you can go ahead and like jump off of that, or I give them a book, like a picture book or something. So we start the first week of school talking about identity and who you are and how who you are and where you are kind of impacts how other people will view you and see you. And that, so racial identity development, we talk a lot about religion. And, you know, the kids are 8. So whatever question you ask them, they're going to answer it how they know how to answer. So I kind of just go off of what they say and move forward. But if you're not asking the questions, you're not going to know what they know or what they're thinking. And you're not going to be able to clear up misconceptions.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, 8, 9, having a 9-year-old, just wondering, what are the kind of questions you have found over the years that have been consistent that come from kids around that age when it comes to these topics?
So in some way, like I teach second grade and I've taught third grade, but so like that 7, 8, 9 age group, the things that they, like a misconception is that if they're like saying, hey, that kid over there, and you're like, which one? And they go, the black kid or the white kid or the Latinx kid, they think that we think they're being racist because they've identified someone by their race. So that's like, no, that's an identifier. Like there's 14 kids over there. Which one are you talking about? It's kind of like, just they're identifying. So ideas like that, they know that racist is a thing and they know that it's not a good thing, but they don't actually know the things that would qualify as racist and the things that aren't, or the things that are anti-racist. So that's one thing. But I've also taught upper elementary, and they'll talk about anything.
Yeah.
We do current events a lot, and so current events has been a gauge for me about where they are in the world and how they are in the world and what they can talk about and what they want to know about. And fourth and fifth grade, they bring all kinds of, they talk about privilege, they talk about racism, they talk about sexism. 8-year-olds are still just, what does race even mean? And what is my race? And why is my race different than your race? And that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to get to CRREW, but before that, you raised another question for me, which is current events.
Yeah.
What's your sense of how students are doing now? I mean, I think it's safe to say coming into the 2019-2020 school year, you probably didn't anticipate a pandemic.
No, sure didn't.
So, I mean, things have just dramatically in weeks changed. What's your sense of how kids are doing dealing with what's currently happening in our nation?
So I don't honestly know. I've been trying to get them to talk about it. And like, we just started maybe 3 weeks ago being able to have like video conferences with our kids. And they're so quiet. And I think that the technology, like, one, I see my classmates and my teacher, but we're not together in the same room. How is like the technology, I think just trying to figure out how it's working and getting it to work. And, oh, look, there's a chat box. I'm not listening to anybody. So I think like just technology itself is a giant thing that they're learning. I think that they feel like I feel. Like some days it's good. Some days I really miss everybody. Some days I just want to sit down and do nothing. Some days I really want to bang out some work. So I would imagine that they're feeling the same. And we've been having these conversations in like our staff meetings about learning and what is teaching and learning in this pandemic, and this idea that we have to teach them and they have to do a math thing and they have to do this. And I'm like, no, our kids are learning. It's like, what do we define learning as? And I think that they are learning and that they're fine learning. But I don't know. I think it's different with each family and each situation. Like, is it too stressful? Is getting on the technology and doing all the assignments? And I mean, if I'm an only child and I have no siblings, I can do all the work, but am I really sad and bored because I've got no one else to talk to? I got 5 siblings and we're all trying to share one computer. And then am I learning how to solve problems and keep myself not bored when my siblings are using the computer? So I think that there's a lot going on for them. And I think sometimes they're really overwhelmed. I'm really overwhelmed sometimes. And I'm really curious about like next year. We're going to have kids that have done nothing. And we're going to have kids that may have like grown over a year in this time because they could go at their own pace. So like, what is school going to look like when we do eventually get to go back? Are we going to have more supports? How are we going to find out where everybody's at? Does second grade really mean second grade? Because I might have like pre-K to 4th grade levels in there, and it's like just might be more varied. So I don't know. That was a big roundabout answer that covered.
Yeah,
I'm wondering all the things I'm thinking when people are like, how are you? Well, let me tell you what I'm thinking about. I'm not good.
Yeah. Well, what about your sense of what this time is telling us about the time we're in? What's your sense as you now stop for whatever days? I know you're still grinding, doing your work, but essentially you can't go out and about. We can't do the things we normally do. We got to spend some shelter in place. So
yeah.
A lot of times, folks like us who are in education and do work with young people, we're always thinking and reflecting. So as you've been doing all of that, what is this pandemic, this current time telling you about the nation we're living in, the challenges ahead?
Whatever we thought was normal, it's not normal. I think that our lives are going to be changed. I think it's good. Like there's lots of things that have been happening, especially like in education, like all the questions of equity and who gets what and who has access to what. And if they don't, how do we give it to them? And even if they have it and they're not doing it, what does that mean about kids' lives at home and teachers' lives at home? And will we be able to change systems that clearly weren't working so that they work better for everyone? Because like the first few weeks was like, does everybody have food? Does everybody have a computer? Does everybody have a hotspot? Does everybody have an older person at home that's helping them? Does like just this idea about equity in education and how inequitable it is, like it all kind of like bubbled up to the surface that, yeah, we're not equitable. What does this mean for the future? And how are we going to change? Because we can't go back to normal, because then it's just ignoring that the system didn't work in the first place. So what does that mean?
Yeah, yeah. So can you tell me about CRREW? I mean, how did it come about? I mean, where the name, the initials came about? I mean, what were you thinking? How did all that come to place?
So my last year at UW, I was trying to think, well, what's next? What am I going to do next? And one of my findings that came out of my dissertation was this idea about our racial identity development gap between white teachers and students of color. And how do we teach teachers, white teachers specifically, that racial identity is key to how a person navigates through the world. And if you have a different identity than another person, the way you navigate through the world and how the world sees you is going to be different. And that we can't keep going on that, well, this didn't happen to me, so I don't know why it happened to you, or just like to take racial identity into consideration when we're doing our work. And so CRREW came about. You remember Elizabeth, who helped with WPS here? She and I and Raydell, you know Raydell too, right?
I do.
Yeah, the three of us, and then another friend of ours, Kim, who now lives in Costa Rica. Elizabeth and I were having lunch one day, and we're like, how do we talk to teachers about race without getting mad and wanting to punch them in the face? So we started with like this book study thing, and like having book studies and having teachers talk, and then it just kind of grew into more like professional development for teachers. And we went into a couple schools and we did some workshop series. And our ideas were like, we didn't want teachers to pay for professional development. One and done workshops don't work. So how are we going to make ourselves present and available? And we're full-time. We work, like Elizabeth and I work full-time in the classroom. Raydell works for TAF. So it's just kind of like, how do we do these things to make a difference? Because you go to one workshop, you've got these great ideas, and then you go right back to the grind and you forget everything you learned, or you don't know how to make it all work. So that's CRREW came about because we put 2 R's in it, because when you Google CRREW, there's that acronym is used for a whole bunch of things, but if you put 2 R's in it, then you
a flavor. You got
right
flavor. Yeah. Yeah. So you had mentioned some frustrations with teachers. I was wondering if you could expand on that, you know, being in education, you know, studying education, I mean, doing the work day to day of education. What's your sense of how the profile, the state of the current teacher today, when it comes to the challenges and the diversity and cultural competencies needed and associated with the student populations and the issues that they're going to be facing? What's your sense of how they're doing, how prepared they are, and what we should be thinking about moving ahead?
Oh, that's a big question. Okay, so first, I think that a lot of us think we are culturally responsive and culturally competent, and whatever term you're using, if you're a multicultural educator or an educator for justice, we think we're doing it, but then the second we get challenged, we realize we're not doing it, or somebody realizes we're not doing it. And so I think that, like, professional development in school, everything should be focused around equity, and it's not. It's like equity is a total separate thing. In my district anyway, it's getting better, but like, here's your equity training, here's your PSYOP training, here's your writing training, here's this. But they kind of all need to like mix and mingle together. So first part, I think we're not
The question, yes, is about the current state of the teacher. And you were saying
that I think teachers think they're more woke than they really are. Summary. And then your other part of that question was like, are teachers prepared? I don't think so. When I was at UW, I got to work in the teacher education program. And so that was another perspective, another place in education that I hadn't actually seen before. So that was pretty eye-opening too. Like we have one multicultural education class, but multicultural education isn't, or cultural and culturally responsive teaching are kind of touched upon, but you're not ready when you graduate from a teacher education program to actually be a culturally responsive teacher, let alone help others become culturally responsive teachers. Because I think like the idea is that you've got teachers who have been teaching 1 year all the way to like 30 years. And if you're new out of a teacher education program, maybe you know a little more about that than somebody who got a lifetime credential 25 years ago and doesn't have to do any professional development. So I do think that we need to prepare our pre-service teachers a little bit more. I don't know how, because the programs keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and they're spending more time in the classroom and less time in the university or wherever their program is. So that's hard. And I think just we need to continually work on our professional development all of the time, and race and equity and whiteness, like what does it mean? What does that even mean, whiteness? What does privilege mean? How is white supremacy showing up in my staff meeting and my classroom, and how do I interrupt that on a regular basis? Those aren't the things we're talking about. So it's more like, I'm the teacher, this is what I notice in our demographic, how am I going to help that demographic, instead of how am I going to make this place more open and appealing. It's always like, what can we do for others, not what am I going to do for myself, so that in being a better person, then I can be better for others.
Well, let's take those three terms and just do a kind of model for teachers who may be listening, or maybe even parents tuning in. I mean, what, in your experience, first, how do you define whiteness? And in your experience, what are some ways, what one or two ways that it's shown up in the classroom of a teacher?
Okay, so when I use whiteness or white supremacy cultural norms, I'm talking about a system that was put in place that we all kind of just follow the rules. So it's not about one person or one group of people at a school. It's about a system put in place where many people are following these same rules. So the rules they fall under white supremacy cultural norms, because white supremacy is the system that I'm referring to. And there's so many ways it shows up in the classroom. First and foremost, our calendar. Winter break is always around Christmas. Spring break is usually around Easter. The way we celebrate holidays, like what is paid attention to, who is paid attention to. So that's one, just actual physical calendar. And then like how kids' voices are heard in the classroom. So if it's just a teacher and then everybody listening, that's a white supremacy cultural norm. I have the information that I'm giving to you. But like flipping that and like, what information do you have to share with everybody, and how can I be more of a facilitator and guide in learning, rather than the person that has all the information that I have to give you because the state says you need to know X, Y, and Z before you go to the next step. But like, how do we just be together?
Yeah.
Staff meetings, like there's always an agenda. Not everybody gets to speak. Hardly anybody gets to share what they're really thinking or how they're really feeling. And then just as like how staff meetings don't mirror the classroom. Like we want to do class meetings and we want to do social emotional learning and all of that. meetings, we don't do that with the adults in the room. So like if we don't, just this emphasis and priority and just how much power, time, and do it because I don't have any time. I tried to get to it, but there was no time. Like, we can't finish this right now because there's no more time. So just how do we shape things differently so there's always time? Everybody's always happy and feels safe and taken care of.
Yeah.
Teachers and kids.
Now, that's great. Whiteness defined, whiteness examples. Now, give me a sense of how you would interrupt one or two of those, change one or two of those, push back against one or two of those, just for those who are now clear about the definition, clear about how it shows up. Now, what can I do?
Okay, so I have the Tikamoku, I can't remember how to pronounce the name, has the white supremacy cultural norms, and I look at it frequently, and I'm like, which one am I going to interrupt today? And like, because it's got the like little anecdotes or like the anti-narrative, counter narrative, and some of the ones that I work on a lot are like conflict, like fear, like a white supremacy norm is like not wanting you don't push back, you just listen. It's also women too are like supposed to be quiet, and so I think like we have a hard time in education because most of us are women to push back and have conflict. So like conflict doesn't mean a big old fight and then everybody hates each other and nobody talks to each other. Conflict could be healthy. Conflict could be like, I hear that you said this and I'm going to push back on that because X, Y, and Z. So like one time a person had used the term ghetto in a meeting that I was in. And then later I went and we talked about why that is not an appropriate word in like any context here, especially the context we were in the meeting. And it was a great conversation. And that person is like one of my most favorite people because we were able to, I didn't feel afraid to talk to them about using that word. And there's other times where like your team wants to do this unit and you're just like, nope, this is not going to help my kids in their racial identity development. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. Let me tell you why. And then it gets in a big old fight. And so sometimes it's a good outcome and sometimes it's not. So, but you just gotta, I will say, if you're the only one in the building and everybody feels like you're always pushing back, it gets a little isolating.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about that, but let's say calendar seems to be white in celebration and recognition. Therefore, possibly a reproduction of whiteness, white supremacy culture. What would be your idea? No more calendars? What would be your suggestion for a kind of challenge or change to that calendar?
It would be cool if like we took, you know how there's like, you have to have 182 days of education. Why do those 182 days have to be between the beginning of September and the middle of June? Or if you're some in another state, sometimes the middle of August to the beginning of June. Can school be year round? Can we take time off for holidays for anybody who needs holiday? Does my school have to follow the same calendar as your school? If my school is like 80% Muslim, why don't we just take Ramadan off? Like, why do we have to take winter break and spring break or summer break? Can it be based on who goes to the school and what the kids and their families need? Not this like, we're all going to have the same thing and we're all going to have the same time off.
Yeah. So you mentioned this, which I think it's important to touch on, which is sometimes when you're committed to justice and equity in your school building, you could win some friends, but you could also win some enemies.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, like, how do you take care of yourself as someone who pushes and challenges folks around these issues? And sometimes, winning some folks over, but also maybe, quite frankly, pissing some folks off.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're having this conversation because this is something that's been weighing on me this year. I think sometimes, I'm just going to speak from my point of view and what's happening right now. I really enjoy the people that I work with. And sometimes when you consider your colleagues friends, you have a different way that you interact. So I think sometimes if we're friends, sometimes it can be easier to talk to them, but sometimes it's like, oh, I know if I say this, that person's really sensitive and they're not going to take it the right way. So I'm just not going to say it because I don't want to hurt their feelings. But in the end, if you don't talk about it, it's not her that you're hurting, it's the kids that are going to hurt. So I think I'm having a shift in how I think about people I work with, their colleagues. And our goal there together is to grow happy, healthy kids who have positive identities. And so if that's my goal, then I need to just do what I need to do to get my kids to grow. Hopefully adults will grow too, but my main concern in an elementary school is my students. And to just at the forefront, it's always the kids, it's always the kids, it's always the kids.
Yeah. So a lot of times when we're talking about schools and some of the challenges associated with equity and diversity and privilege and whiteness, you got the battle, the challenge, the difficulties of colleagues and administrators, and of course the work you have to do with kids. What about parents? I mean, what's been your experience doing this work in the parent community, with the parent community, when it comes to some of the issues we've been talking about?
I've been doing this work a long time. Okay, I don't want to say a long time. I don't want to give away how old I am, but for a minute now. And I build really strong relationships at the beginning of the year, like family nights, and just, I want my parents to see me interact with their kids on a, not an academic level, but a social emotional level. And I want to interact with them in that way too. And so building strong relationships with the parents has helped me be able to do this work even more. And I find like many of the parents are glad because they either don't do it or they don't know how to do it. And then we can partner in it and work together. There have been a couple of times where parents are like, I wasn't really cool with that lesson you did. Can you talk to me more about this? And then we talk about it and then either agree together at the end or agree to disagree, or just, because in the end, we all want our kids to be happy, healthy, take care of each other, and understand that the way the world works, it doesn't work the same for everybody.
Yeah. So, Doc, what's in the future, the next 10 years? What can we expect from you, from CRREW? Can you first tell us how to find CRREW? What's a way folks can learn more information about that? But also, as you look at the next 10 years of your work and what you're hoping and wanting to do, what's in the future?
Well, I hope in the future I get to be with people in the same room. And I want to, here's what I'm doing. I'm applying to grad school again to get my admin cert. I would like to start my own school with other CRREW co-founders, start a school that's kind of like, I guess they're called a lab school, but every teacher has a student teacher, and the entire program happens in the elementary school, not at a university. So all the teachers are the professors, everybody is learning from each other, and that it would be a justice, anti-racist focused program, and that all of the teachers would then leave and go somewhere else and continue the work in other places. So I would love to start a school, teach teachers how to do this work.
And how can we find CRREW and the information about that?
You may go to www.crrewcollective.org. There's There's not a whole lot there because we're a little slow right now, but all of our workshops are on there and materials for any of the workshops. So if anybody went there and they wanted to do one of those workshops, they would just email me, Suzie at CRREW Collective, and I will help people do the work there. Or, I mean, right now, I guess Zoom is how we do things, so I could lead something with 4 people or whatever. But yeah, it's been, we've got some cool stuff in there.
All right, well, I'm gonna do some popcorn style here. Just name a topic and ask you to give me 15, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute at the most response to the popcorn. All right, so let's start with white women teachers.
Yes.
What's your thought? What's your thought? What comes up?
Okay, the very first thing that came up is like, oh man, we need to be better. I think we need to be better. We need to be better because we need to raise white anti-racist students to be better adults. You can never stop learning how to be anti-racist. I think that, and this is like the whole reason CRREW kind of started, was because we need to continue professional development as in-service teachers around racial identity development. What does it mean? What does it even mean to be a white teacher in the United States? What's my responsibility? What is my job? Who am I accountable to and for? Who do I talk to? Like, there's just so many not unanswered questions. I don't even know that all the questions are being asked.
Yeah. What about code switching?
Yes.
What comes up when you hear code switching?
What comes up is code switching is like how you, or anyone, how they talk, sit, behave, interact in one space versus a different space. So almost like you have, I don't want to say multiple personalities, but you have to check where you are and who you are in that place according to the other people that are in there, and then how you're going to react or interact and just be in a space.
What's the hardest thing about living in progressive, all-inclusive Pacific Northwest? Are there some challenges when your city, your region is to presume to be more accepting, more progressive? Can you talk a little bit about that? What comes up when I say Seattle, 206, Pacific Northwest, far more progressive?
Is not far more progressive. I think like voting more liberally versus being progressive are 2 totally different things. So, you know, I want to vote for, I don't know, preschool for all, but do I want to pay for it? Like, I want it, but am I willing to pay for it? I don't. I've only lived here a decade, and it's different than any other place I've ever lived. I'm from the Bay Area in California, and like that is also seems to be a progressive place, but I feel like people there actually do things. This is what we want to do, let's do it. And then here it's like, yeah, that's a good idea, go do it. There's like no investment and no like, I want to help. It's just like, good idea, somebody else go do it. And as long as it doesn't impact me in my life, cool.
Are you going with Sue Bird or Candace Parker? Are you going with Macklemore or Sir Mix-a-Lot?
Oh, Sir Mix-a-Lot.
Are you going with Tupac or Biggie Smalls?
Tupac.
Michael Jordan, LeBron James?
LeBron. Okay, your next question has to be, are you still going to be a Raiders fan when they move to Vegas?
Oh my goodness. Well, I never knew they had a football team in California until the Chargers. But yeah, are you going? Are you going to LA? I mean, are you going to Vegas?
I don't know. Honestly, I haven't really followed football since the whole Kaepernick thing, so I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, well, it
Raiders.
raises a good. It raises another good question about the role, the way we're seeing NFL players. It seems stand up in reference to the recent killing of Ahmad Arbery, sorry,
Okay.
versus recognition to Kaepernick and some of the things he was standing up about, particularly around Eric Gardner, Trayvon Martin time. What's been your sense of that? It's almost like they're saying Tom Brady started this rally for justice almost. That's what it feels like. I mean, what's your sense?
I mean, I feel like now that we're saying all this out loud, you know how like we were talking about teachers and where are we, or not teachers, but like the Northwest, and it's liberal North, progressive Northwest. Are we really? But it's like, it's almost like Colin Kaepernick challenged people. And all they had to do was listen and say, yeah, you know what, you're right. What are we going to do about it? But no, nobody wanted to, you go ahead, but not me. It's like, as long as I'm not totally impacted. So Tom Brady, I can't even.
Can't go there.
Okay, no.
Well, let me ask you one last question. What have you been watching, reading, listening to during the pandemic, during quarantine? Is there anything you want to add to our, here's what you should watch, read, or listen to during the pandemic list?
Okay, first I'm going to say, learning how to teach remotely was so cognitively exhausting the first few weeks. All I did was watch TV. I was like, I can't even pick up a book. I have been watching, I watched, there was a little mini series about CJ Madam Walker.
Yes.
That was really good. The Banker was good. I also liked Outer Banks. Did you watch Outer Banks?
I've seen the clippings for Outer Banks. It's good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's just like a teen treasure hunt kind of show.
Yeah.
But nobody has phones in this show, and I'm dying to talk to somebody else who also noticed nobody has a phone. The guy's like, the guy's in my house. I gotta go get the cops. And then he gets on his bike and runs down the street. I'm like, why didn't you just call 911, man? So that one was fun. What else did I watch? Good Girls.
Good Girls. That's the bank robbery or something.
Yeah, suburban moms gone to a life of crime.
Oh, yeah, that was good.
It was funny.
Okay.
And stressful, but yeah.
Okay. Well, those are some good escape hatches you have there.
Escape hatches, yeah.
Well, listen, we've always appreciated you supporting, attending, presenting at the White Rivers Conference, myself supporting me and my work when I was there in the 206, and even as I moved away. And as long as you'll continue to be a partner, we'll continue to partner with you.
Totally. Are you is WPS coming back in
Well, we were excited for a spring spring-ish WPS, but we haven't talked about when, but I do think the intention is to reschedule for next year. So yeah, we had a real nice lineup, real exciting lineup. And so I'm hoping we can rekindle that with Shoreline because they were on board, ready to go.
Awesome.
So, all right. In the meantime, thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Enjoy the weekend.
You too.
Take care.
All right, you too. Thanks. Good to see you.